Hey, Amy, can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
We
Katie,
can,
yep,
yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Katie, can we try again for a volume check?
Yeah, you got me here?
Awesome. Yeah, we turned up the volume here. We can hear you a whole lot better now. So,
Thank you.
well, it is 6 o'clock, so I'll go ahead and get this meeting going. That way we can get through what may be a lengthy meeting, but with lots of good information, and hence the reason for the length tonight. So tonight we're gathered to go over the short-term tourism plan, the end of season review. So we're here to learn the goods, the bads, and the uglies about our tourism plan last year, how it worked, and some thoughts and ideas going forward on next year and how we can improve not only the visitor experience, but our local experience as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to the real star of the show tonight, Amy Ainsley. She's going to lead us through the majority of this. We do have our assembly and our planning commission seated tonight. This is a work session tonight, so a little looser format. So please, assembly members, planning commission members, if you have questions, just jump in here. I don't think we need to moderate this meeting. So let's, if we have questions, we can jump in. And then Amy, please, thank you.
All right. So the agenda for this evening is we'll do a little bit of an introduction of the that Mayor Eisenbeis just completed, and then we'll also recap the plan just to kind of get everyone on the same grounding for some of the key tenets of the short-term tourism plan. We will then have presentations from a couple of different groups or from kind of different aspects. Visit Sitka will give us a presentation. We'll hear from Sitka Sound Cruise Terminal. Information about the traffic study that we undertook this season, and John will speak a little bit to the cost allocation study that we also are in the process of completing. We'll then go over the community survey results. There was a community survey specific towards the sort of end of season feedback that was open from September 15th to October 15th. So the results are here to be discussed. We'll then talk about kind of the staff perspective on lessons learned and recommendations and next steps. So on the short-term tourism plan, this really kicked off in March of 2021 when we heard the passenger announcement, the volumes that we were anticipating at that time, about approximately 400,000 passengers. And the Assembly directed the Planning Department and Commission to develop a plan to sort of handle the logistics of increased cruise visitation. We held a joint work session in April to kind of scope out the plan and decide on deliverables, and the public process really took place between May and December of 2021 with over about 25 public meetings on the plan's development. We completed a draft to get more input from the public on the plan, and held another joint work session between these two bodies in January to kind of go over the draft plan and the results of the community survey. The commission recommended a final version of that plan for adoption in January, and the Assembly did indeed adopt the plan in February. And we also made supplemental appropriations at that time to carry out the programs, procurement needs, staffing needs that were associated with the plan. And February through May, we spent as staff a great deal of time on the sort of logistics and procurement to execute the plan to welcome the first ships coming in about May with our first Lincoln Street closure. The primary tenets of the plan were kind of fivefold. The dispersion aspect of how to keep passengers moving throughout town to prevent any one area from becoming too congested. Transportation needs and exploring options for resident and passenger transportation. Managing traffic impacts, as well as gauging our infrastructure needs, and developing some ideas about what future planning may be needed. Three kind of major buckets of the execution. So the new operations included, obviously the biggest one and kind of the biggest lift for city staff was the Lincoln Street closure. So we decided to at first close the street on days where we had 3,000 or more cruise ship passengers in town based on actual count. That has fluctuated a little bit throughout the season. We bumped that up to 4,000 after seeing that 3,000 was a little bit kind of slow, a little quiet on the street. We also found at, kind of partway through the season that getting actual numbers was a little bit too difficult to be able to do. And we were spending a lot of time trying to get actual numbers before passengers came to town and not doing that particularly successfully. And so we needed to kind of change gears and start basing it on capacity. So we raised the threshold to 5,000 capacity. And that took place at about mid-August and continued through the rest of the year. But that was, a lot of procurement, staffing, and communication needs as a part of that project. And then there were also sort of overall communications. There was a desire from the assembly to have a community feedback line and for the community to have ways to voice their concerns. So kind of getting up and running a community feedback line and email address as well. And then we also had temporary restrooms in the downtown area, as that was a really heavily identified need through the planning process. In terms of changed and increased operations, Harrigan was really heavily impacted. There was obviously just a lot more volume coming through activities that took place across the campus and traffic direction as well. So Harrigan definitely played a really major role in terms of, the visitors industry in general, but also, faced a lot of the biggest increases in volume, operational intensity, and changes. Public Works similarly had a really heavy lift with some of the programs that we did. The Lincoln Street closure was staffed by the Public Works Department, their streets crew. Also, a lot of work went into the traffic control planning at the front end, as well as the temporary restroom facilities, trash management, on top of the overall higher volume that we generally see in the summer months for grounds maintenance as well. Police Department was very active in helping with the street closures, making sure that the street was cleared prior to closure, contacting vehicle owners as much as possible to try and prevent those from getting stuck within the closure area or being ticketed, and also just having increased presence in the downtown area. Fire department had a really significant increase in calls, and we'll kind of on the next slide take a look at the just breakdown between resident and non-resident use for our EMS services in particular. Harbor department had a lot of work on their plate this year with staffing port security, with more cruise ship visitation and more calls into our tendering facilities and to the GPIP dock as well. There was a really increased need for port security and a difficult time staffing those positions. That ended up putting a lot of strain on the harbor department staff on top of what is already their really busy season. And our library as well had quite a bit more visitation, high volume there as well. In terms of new programs and studies that we worked on, we instituted a bathroom grant program. We wanted to see if we could incentivize private property owners to open up their restrooms to the public to help create a little bit more opportunity for restroom availability. We had about 6 organizations participate in that program. And I will say a lesson learned for myself is that we set the base level for the grant at 1,000, and then we were going to disperse more based on the number of applicants we got, and it was a formula based on how large your restroom was in essence. But the number that a lot of people heard was 1,000 and said, well, $1,000 isn't enough for me to open my restroom. And so I think there was just not as clear of communication as possible. So it's hard to say whether this was a really successful program or something that people would be interested in doing again in the future. Lesson learned for myself is that it needed to be advertised a little bit differently. We also instituted the Walk, Bike, Win program. We will be speaking towards that a little bit later, so I'll skip on to that. With our food cart permitting, we had to change operations on that, given that we had large open space on Lincoln Street for people to be able to operate on. And so we had to sort of work the permitting system to accommodate for use of the closure area for Lincoln Street and kind of set some parameters around how food carts could operate there in that closure area. Harrigan had a permitting study that they were working on to kind of reassess how permitting was working here at this facility and pricing. We also undertook a cost allocation study to better understand the impact on infrastructure and city services that cruise visitation has, specifically to try and allocate out those costs more appropriately. And we also undertook a traffic study as well. It was really focused here on the downtown area. But again, we'll get into that into a little bit more specifics, but that is another piece. Some key numbers. In total, we had 383,000 cruise ship passengers this summer. So a bit of a decline from our peak of what we expected. The kind of highest forecast that we had heard was 480,000, but still a really significant season and still our largest season on record by about 100,000. Our highest season was in 2008 with about 285,000 passengers. And at that time, all of the passengers were still being tendered into facilities here in the downtown area. And so the associated bus volume and trips on Halibut Point Road, very different scenario, particularly on the transportation piece, and therefore kind of a different impact on the community. So both a very different season in terms of sort of the logistics around bringing this many passengers to town, as well as just higher volumes. And in total, we had about 74 Lincoln Street closures. Wanted to highlight a little bit on, there's been a lot of questions so far on sales tax revenue. So I thought I would speak to that real quickly. We don't have receipts for July through September yet. Those are have to be postmarked by, I believe, the 31st. So folks still have time to turn in those receipts. And so we don't have the full receipts for sales tax for the first quarter of fiscal year 23 as of yet. But I did pull the summer, kind of what we consider our summer season in terms of our fiscal quarters, April through June and July through September for 2019, 2020, 2021, and what we had for 2022. There's some really interesting opportunity for observation here because of 2020 and 2021. 2020, we had no cruise ship passengers. And in 2020, we had very strong visitors, independent visitor season, but very low cruise traffic. And so to kind of get to see the changes in sales tax return with those different base years is a kind of an interesting opportunity to observe the impact that those different segments of travel have on our sales tax revenues. But as you can see, between 2020 and 2022, just in this April through June quarter, we're looking at a really significant increase in sales tax returns. And then even over 2021, we're looking at about $1.5 million higher for returns. So we're very anxiously awaiting those returns for July through September, as well as that's, kind of hits the peak season, particularly for cruise travel.
Amy, on the emplanements, I'm assuming we're not able to segment that out between visitors and locals coming and going. It's just the people walking off the plane.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I do think again, the 2020 year is really interesting though, because if again, not a lot of probably still some independent travel for, for leisure, but a lot of, travel in 2020 was going to be probably your critical necessary travel. And so you might kind of look at that 20,000 as sort of your base amount for primarily resident travel, but again, not able to fully segment that out. And then on our EMS transports as well, we're looking at about a 60-40 split between need for transports for resident use and then for non-resident use. There is a good segment of non-resident use to keep in mind that is medical travel. Since we are a regional healthcare location, there is a fair amount of non-resident travel for those in outlying communities that use Sitka as their hub. And that's kind of to be expected, but we do have, pretty significant portion of our EMS services working in part for independent and cruise travelers. We did bring on additional staff this year in the fire department to help. We do usually bring on I believe 1 to 2 temp employees in the summer, and we brought on an additional one for this season. And I've heard really good feedback that was really critical in keeping things staffed.
Amy, can I ask you, it's not on this slide, but you talked about the 3 columns on the previous slide, and the police had more to do this year. I'm still confused. Did we have an MSO in? So how many additional police officers did we add?
We added 1 additional multi-service officer, and they were working primarily on parking enforcement. And there was, as far as being able to look at some of the preliminary results of the traffic study, and anecdotally, I think that made a really big difference, particularly here in the Crescent lot for sure. However, that seasonal MSO that we hired decided to go to the academy. And so they eventually transitioned, and they're transitioning into an officer position. So we had extra MSO work for part of the summer, but not the whole summer.
And when we say MSO and enforcement officer, that's the same, two names for the same position?
There is a separate position being created. That's like a code position that was hired, that was brought on a temporary basis, was an additional MSO.
Got it. Thank you. And it's a win for us if they're going to become an officer. So that's great.
Lost my controls. So that's kind of the overview for elements of the plan, what we executed and what we worked on so far, as just at least a starting point. So I'll now invite Visit Sitka to come forward, and we've got a couple of slides and some information to hear from Visit Sitka.
I would John's good.
Good evening. Thank you, Assembly of the Greater Sitka Chamber of Commerce and Visit Sitka.
And I'm Laurie Boysa, the Director of Visit Sitka.
So thank you, Amy, for inviting us to give an update on the activities that Visit Sitka took as part of executing the the short-term tourism plan. I'll take the next slide. Visit Sitka is a part of the Sitka Chamber of Commerce as a contract, Convention and Visitor Services contract that we have been doing since 2015. We are funded through the Visitor Enhancement Fund, which is the bed tax that's collected to for hotel and lodging. The transient lodging tax is what it's called. The Visitor Enhancement Fund is primarily for municipal officials travel for convention and trade shows promoting tourism. The current contract that we are in is began in 1-year renewals, 5 1-year renewals. It's a lot. It's a mouthful. And so this is how we created the destination marketing agency that we are. And on the next slide, we'll talk about what's new in some of the management tasks that we took on. And actually, destination marketing and management organizations exist around our country to help city governments with these types of tasks. And so we were really glad to be able to put in a response to the RFI this spring, and we were contracted adopted in April to do activities around community-wide communications and creating a communications plan and strategy for getting the word out on the things that would impact our community in relation to the plan. We did some signage and design, which Laurie brought up as a show and tell. And also as part of the Lincoln Street closures, we had staff supervising and monitoring the closures and ensuring that the streets were, that was all handled and happening. And we also added roving information staff into the downtown. And the next slide. I will let Laurie talk more about our communications that happened this summer.
A multi-pronged plan to reach out to people in as many ways as we possibly could to give them information about the road closures as well as any cruise ship calendar changes. We implemented a series of, well, the first thing, we created this new Facebook account called Sitka Tourism, and it was open to the changes. Pinned on the beginning of it was the information for the community feedback line, which was a phone number and an email. The phone number, we used a city phone number that the city provided for us, and people could call and just leave information. We did ask them for as much detail as possible, so that if there was a problem, we could go to the source of the issue. And we logged and tracked all of that, those calls. We also, if it was something specific to a specific operator, if it was a Harrigan situation, if it was a business owner, we passed that information on to the correct source so that they could whenever there was a change in the cruise ship calendar, we had a protocol, a communications protocol that we instituted where we would immediately, as soon as we received information on changes, enact this series of steps. And it included sending informational messages out to the media, to the core group that made up what we called the Tourism Command Group this summer. And it also included putting messages out on Facebook, changing our live Google Calendar. I made sure that all of the media knew in a timely manner so that we would meet their deadlines. So for example, the newspaper would know before their cutoff time so they could change the box on the front page if there was changes for the next day. And we also reached out to the supervisor directly so that they would know as soon as possible that there were changes. We also had in front of our building a sandwich board. It's very low tech, but you can see in the picture here, it sat outside our building, and we always, for the entire summer, let people know when the next Lincoln Street closure was as they drove through town. There was a sign on each side there, so you could see. So we had created a way we hoped to reach people wherever they were looking for that information. And I think we were fairly successful with that program. Yep, next slide. One of the things that we did as part of the agreement we had this summer for this program was we hired a dedicated staff member whose job was to maintain a relationship with the businesses downtown. That had the fire and the police frequency on it, so that if there was a problem, she could communicate directly with them if necessary. We did a training at one point with the fire department with how to handle if there was an emergency at the Pioneer Home and the ambulance needed to access Lincoln Street during a closure. So we did a drill. Able to get out and help the fire department access Lincoln Street, and it was a very safe situation. Her main job was safety, making sure that the roads got closed safely. And to make sure that the business owners felt that their needs were being met. And I think that I feel she did that successfully. And she was kind of our eyes and ears and boots on the ground every day. She went out every day there was a closure and reached out to the business owners. And before she left, one of the things she did do was she did a very short survey of the downtown merchants. Business downtown was given a card and asked to fill out the survey. So anyone who was doing any kind of business along the closure area was asked to answer the survey. And we actually got 15 responses from the business owners downtown. We weren't looking for a deep dive of information, but we were just looking for general sentiment. And as you can see, our first very simple question was the summer successful for you and your business? And overwhelmingly, the majority of people said, yeah, it was a good summer for us. Anecdotally, we heard through our contact there that the majority of the business owners said that it was by the middle of the summer, they had already reached their the same sales they had throughout the entire summer in 2019. So by the end of this summer, the majority best season for sales this summer.
And I'll just add, we had also asked, what did you like about the season? And we heard a couple kind of direct quotes from those business owners. Tourism is a relatively clean industry, and these tourists spent money in our local economy. The outside money brought much needed economic vitality to Sitka, benefiting us all directly and indirectly. They also said the cooperative sharing of Lincoln between locals and visitors, and also really appreciated the presence of Sandy, which is was our visitor services coordinator, who walked the streets. And that was part of that service, was a 4-hour, every street closure, we had visitor staff down there for 4 hours. And so it was kind of, we planned it beginning for sure, and then making sure that everything got taken care of on the really heavy days, checking the restrooms, making sure that those were good, and being in direct contact with the city whenever needed for that maintenance or cleaning requirements.
But then we also asked them, oh, go ahead.
I just, so you had 15 surveys received, of how many that you put out? Like, what was your response rate percentage? And knowing that 10% is a good response rate,
Yeah.
so.
Oh, I wondered what the number of downtown businesses are. We hit everybody, so every restaurant, every shop, and including like the investment company downtown and those folks. Businesses,
Yeah.
so yeah,
That's a
And
good
there's-
response rate then.
yeah.
The other thing that we asked on the flip side was, what did you not like about the season? And these were questions that people typed in their answers, and different merchants had different takes on what they didn't like about the season. Out of the 15 responses, 3 merchants said that there was nothing that they didn't like, which I think is a double negative. But and then some of the direct quotes we received from the merchants were things, street vendors were all over. They were spread and difficult for visitors to find them. There were a couple of people who felt that the police were not as welcoming as they could have been. And they were unhappy with some of the police responses. One person said the street closure was awful, with awful in capital letters. It made incredibly difficult to do business with our year-round local customers who are the backbone of our business. Seeing Lincoln Street relatively empty on too many days when the local residents were blocked from accessing local stores. And the one person said the misinformation that tourists get from the out-of-town workers. They were unhappy about that. And then one person actually said they loved it all. So.
And then the other two questions were, how did Lincoln Street closures affect your business? And so 60% of the respondents said that it was beneficial. 6 said that there wasn't a change, and then about 30% said that it was not beneficial to their business. And that may have been a result of it not being there was feedback just not having customers being able to park directly in front. I think that that parking directly in front of the business was one of the challenges. Although we heard overwhelmingly that parking was not an issue as far as finding alternate parking locations during the closures and in the Crescent Harbor parking lot. So those mitigation efforts really did help. I personally did not was able to kind of enjoy those downtown days as well. The final question was, do you support closures occurring on cruise ship days in the future? And you'll see that 73% said that they did support it. And there are some that said the closures weren't beneficial to their business, but they understood that, or they agreed that the high cruise ship days should have those closures in the future. And so we were hoping that this would be helpful to kind of share some of the sentiment that we have from the merchants down in Lincoln Street specifically.
Quick question. So you said you sent a survey to downtown merchants. Did you send them to people who say utilize this for like the Centennial or the Six Sound Cruise Terminal?
No, this was specifically Lincoln Street businesses,
Okay.
this specific survey. And then we have some kind of demographics of on the next slide, of our community feedback line. We gave every 2 weeks, you saw the kind of the latest round of feedback specifically. And I know that the pre-packet that Amy put together has all of the different responses. But we received kind of a mix, which we had offered a mix of options for people to provide feedback, phone line, and email and in person. Pretty much were each a third of what we responded or how we received input. And then I thought it would be good to kind of show what the types of closure or what the types of comments were. And we did receive compliments of people that were just really supportive and wanting to share that they had supported it. The safety and accessibility was a bigger concern. I think the largest number of our feedbacks, the bathrooms, especially when the bathrooms were first installed, there was several calls around that, trying to understand them and the purpose and trying to kind of figure that out. And then traffic, definitely traffic. And I think we'll talk more about that, but traffic as far as the pedestrian crossings and Lincoln Street, Lake and Lincoln intersection was a pretty hot topic for that. We had about a third, here we go. About half of the people who submitted were residents that were non-business owners, and 34% were business owners calling into that feedback line, it was neat to be able to have that additional kind of channel for them to talk to us and then be able to provide that feedback directly up to the assembly throughout the summer. And then 17% were visitors. And so the information was out there, and visitors actually also sent in their information to us. That's what we prepared, and we're here to talk more as after more presentations have occurred. So,
I have
Thank you.
one more question.
oh, sure.
So is any of this going to be ongoing? So if we have, I don't know, it's not the right word to say, but if we've trained people to not go downtown, are we going to be mapping out how downtown is doing in the fall and winter? And will you continue to watch? Like, did people get used to ordering things online rather than going downtown because of our heavy tourism season this summer? So will there be data for the fall months as well?
Well, at this time, we don't have a survey scheduled, but I think, one thing we do, especially in the winter, is we talk to business owners and members, and that's really when we come back together for chamber meetings. And we will, we have kind of those mechanisms in place for those connections. But you do bring a good point. I think community back downtown. And so there are, efforts that we have with Shop Local and, encouraging that. But yeah, absolutely, everyone, we should all be, supporting our local retailers and restaurants that are in our community all year, especially those that are open in the
using our downtown less.
Absolutely. Well, and I would just love to hear great reports from our mayor about how everyone is knocking the socks off of last year's sales tax in the last quarter of the year, because we really did. Sitka really came through for our local businesses last year and spent locally. So, yeah.
Could I make a quick comment? About is, our people coming back. My very, very non-scientific study was our last cruise ship day was September 15th or 16th. I don't remember which one exactly, but we had that week from September 19th through the 23rd. It was beautiful. The weather was beautiful. There was not a cloud in the sky the whole week. So 3 times a day, I would walk outside on Lincoln Street, and I wanted to see what it looked like with no tourists here. And I did that, like I said, 3 times a day, the whole week. And at no point did I ever see more than 5 people walking on the sidewalks, going up and down there. So I don't know if that means they weren't going there in the first place, or if it means they were not coming back. So I'd really be interested in hearing about that.
Beautiful weather in Sitka. They might
True.
have been somewhere else.
All right, we'll invite Chris McGraw with the Sitka Sound Cruise Terminal next.
Hello, Assembly and Planning Commission members. Thanks for the invite and being able to address you tonight. I'm just going to kind of go over a quick summary of our season from kind of an industry perspective at the cruise terminal, and then kind of look at what challenges we faced, what went well, what didn't go so well, and then kind of look forward towards next year. Overall, we had a successful season, much more successful than the previous 2 years. We had 194 ship calls at the dock with about 340,000 passengers. So that puts 340 at the dock and about 40,000 tendered either to Centennial Hall or the bridge dock. And then we had about 165,000 crew members call at the dock. Some ships were allowing some crew off, some weren't. But on a daily basis, we would see easily a couple hundred crew getting off each ship. At the beginning of the season, ships started off not completely full. They were running in the 60 to 70% range. As the season went on, certain ships' capacity grew, and by mid-season, many of the newer, larger ships were running at 95 to 100%. So like the Ovation of the Seas, Quantum of the Seas, those were almost full by 4th of July. And then as the season kind of tapered off, capacities kind of came back down a little bit. The Royal Caribbean Ovation of the Seas and the Celebrity Eclipse, total passenger count was 6,983 passengers and 2,600 crew. I think that was probably the largest day Sitka saw this summer of actual passengers. We had some days where capacity was larger, but actual people on board, that was the biggest day. From an operation standpoint, our facility, I think, with it being in the season, had to make a few tweaks on staging for tours, shuttle staging, things like that. But after about the first 2 weeks, everything kind of started flowing really well. The biggest challenge that we ended up running into early in the season was staffing for shuttle drivers. And then kind of that happened late season as well. Primarily the season, late in the season, they're short-staffed, and I'm sure kind of early in the season, you guys would see the line for the shuttle would end up wrapping around the building and by the library, and that's what we want to avoid going forward. Our company, Hollow Point Marine Services, is actually going to be doing the shuttle next season, hiring dedicated staff that will be here from April through October, so we don't run into that situation, so we can ensure good quality shuttle service. The other difficulty with shuttle was Centennial Hall and the congestion that's created at the Lake and Lincoln intersection and then at this facility itself. And I mean, everybody's seen it. I'm sure the traffic study will ships, they have afternoon departures that dock, they come to the dock and then the passengers come into town and the tours depart from here. So those tour buses have to load here and you end up with just a lot of activity in a facility that really wasn't designed for it. And I think going forward, to help with the distribution of passengers, an alternate location for shuttle needs to be looked at. And I think that will help with the migration of people that jaywalk across Harbor Drive. It will help with the traffic at the Lake and Lincoln. And I think if we could find a location that keeps buses from coming through the Lake and Lincoln intersection, it would do a lot to help traffic congestion.
Do you have a suggestion for that?
I do. Baranoff School. I've had
It seems like tight.
I've had a couple of meetings with Jill, the principal. She actually contacted me and she kind of came up with a plan. And I mean, I think it's something that's worth looking at.
Okay.
And it's, relatively close to this facility. There's shuttle, a downtown loop shuttle could be part of it. But ultimately what I see going forward is needing to spread things out a little bit. Because I think the comments that everybody's hearing, the negative comments are congestion. And having all of those activities from this one spot the congestion is not going to get better. Looking towards next season, I kind of looked what schedule's showing, and we have 220 ship calls at the dock for 510,000 passengers. And that's assuming the ships are full. So a pretty significant increase over this year.
So Chris, I have a question for you. Why do you think it's the city's responsibility to fix your problem with the congestion?
I don't. If the city wants to sell me half of the Baranoff Playground, I'll buy it. Or if there's another piece of property that I could buy for shuttle operations, I would buy it. I'd be happy to have a private shuttle drop off downtown. So I'm not looking for the city to fix my problems. We have the cruise terminal, and I think the shuttle operation, we provide it free to the passengers. So I think it's in the best interest of everybody to have a efficient shuttle operation where people don't have to wait. Traffic impact is minimized, and that's my goal going forward.
So if and I know this will probably be solved a different place at different time, but the suggestion at Baranoff School is that the shuttles would come in and everybody coming from the dock would be dropped there. And then they would disperse either to visit Lincoln Street or to come here and pick up a tour.
Correct.
And that solves the problem because they would be coming on foot across Lincoln Street, trickling to the tours rather than coming all at once on a bus.
It just, you don't have that bus traffic coming on Harbor Drive. You would stay on Hollow Point Road, Sawmill Creek. It would keep all that bus traffic over there. And then the pedestrian traffic, you have people heading, to Park, Science Center, Raptor Center. It just, that's to kind of give you guys a perception of the bus. This facility, you have one loop. And the issue with that is loading and unloading. If we have, so say we have 4,000 people we need to move, our buses hold 60 people, that's 67 bus trips. If we have 3 buses leaving every 7 minutes, which is about how often it takes a bus to load, that's 2 hours and 40 minutes to move 4,000 people. And that's if we can load 3 buses at once, which it's difficult to do here. Sometimes, you can do it sometimes, but depending on the front bus, if they have somebody that's got a scooter and it slows down, then everybody behind them is backed up. You increase that to 4 buses every 7. A key to getting people into town quickly, no wait times, passenger experience, and also reducing the traffic and congestion in this downtown core.
And I just maybe wasn't involved in some of the conversations, but the decision to go to 510,000 passengers, that was your decision, or were you working with city leadership?
It's the cruise ships, they book and schedule through Cruise Line Agencies of Alaska. They put out their requests about 3 years ahead of time. And if a port space is available, they take unknown at this point.
And so do we know 3 years from now what to expect?
I've seen a draft 2024 and it's very similar to 2023.
So will growth flatten out?
My opinion is growth will flatten out primarily because dock space is becoming limited. And unless Sitka builds another dock, you're not going to see a significant number of ships because the large ships do not tender.
So the community can begin to expect around 500,000 a year as a fairly stable number is
I would say it's going to be
Best
between
guess.
500,000 and 600,000. Yeah.
Yeah. And has there been any discussion about trying to say that we're over capacity? I mean, we've been dancing around that, but I think a week doesn't go by that I don't get an email from somebody saying you've got to slow down the number of tourists. There are just too damn many. And I think we've all gotten those emails. And, there's just doesn't seem to be any recognition that we might be at capacity and that could go up by another 20-25%. I think there's we need to have that discussion, and about maybe talking to cruise line agencies or something that's saying that we're over capacity.
Well, I think also, so I understand what you're saying, Tor. There is validity to that. But I think taking what happened this summer as exactly a couple of situations. We have the HPR construction that was going on that clogged things up, which is Sawmill Creek. Thank you. Also, we have the light, which is an issue. It needs to be dealt with. I was going to ask that later on, and we need a left-hand turn signal. And then also the fact that looks like they're looking at, we might have a possibility of kind of helping with that, the drop-off point. And then in addition, I believe, and I have to be careful because my work, Shiatica is working on trying to get that, that place down at the end of the road at HPR work going, but at some point that could be a possibility too. So I just don't think we should just gut reaction say, oh, well, this is just too much. It's taken, there were many, many years where it was really low. Yeah, it was miserable this summer. Like it was, and I think Mr. McGraw can even, it was miserable when we were down there. Just the congestion, it was awful. But I don't think we should just jump the gun and say, well, it's going to be like that. So we need to. Way that we're taking into consideration the things that will be in place next year.
I'm not saying that to say that, but I'm saying we definitely need to have the conversation and be aware that Sitka has a capacity.
Of course, I mean,
And- And, you know, I kind of view what's coming as something that's to a large extent natural disasters, but I think we need to at least say that and start looking for an optimal number and talking to the different players about what that optimal number is. And it's probably more of a daily amount than a year-long amount. But, I think we're approaching it, if not there. I mean,
how do we determine that if there's these variables that may be changed next year?
You're also forgetting the fact that the prior 2 years, it was extremely slow. And so there could also be a reflex due to the we went 2 years without having hardly anyone downtown in the summertime to having a huge amount of people. So some of that is probably reactionary. But the other thing too, again, putting limitations on businesses at certain points in times, the businesses are going to start saying, forget it. If you start limiting things, they're going to start looking other directions, which means they're going to start taking even more people away from us because they'll find a place that makes it easier for them. So then we wind up shooting ourselves in the foot. And this one actually works. Yeah, I don't like the congestion. I don't like any of it either, but you got to at least be kind of accepting of it in a give and take situation.
If I could jump in, I probably offer some comments that we'll address later on here. I'm fairly confident, and some discussions that I've had with CLIA on this very issue. The agencies, the cruise agencies that are coming in here, this level of stasis naturally. We don't have places to grow for restaurants. We don't have places to grow for shore excursions to a certain point. Let's say one anyway, is Royal Caribbean that signed a long-term deal. They're here for the long term. And if their passengers don't like coming to Sitka anymore, then it's not in their best interest to continue that. So they've invested in this. And if we get to that point where too many passengers are just piled on the city and then the city's not happy, then the passengers aren't happy and everybody starts losing money here. So when this right now, I know that CLIA is actually on the YouTube channel watching our discussion right now because they want to hear what the community has to say, and they go back and they bring that to the partner agencies. And the mayor and I just sat through a end of season discussion with them communities like Key West and Bar Harbor and some of these places that are putting passenger or attempting to put passenger limits in place. So they want to work with the communities because if the passengers aren't happy and the locals aren't happy, it doesn't work for anybody. And even if that means a cruise knee land at the end of the road, I've heard that term before. At least that's another way to spread passengers out somewhere else, but it still brings revenue in at some point. But that's a lot of words to say. I think we're going to hit a natural stasis, or the cruise companies will lose money as well.
Perfect timing. And I think as you see these numbers grow, I mean, I know independent tour operators that are building new boats to larger capacities. Our tour company, we have a new boat on order, can't get it till 2024, but the tour companies are going to grow with this increased demand, because if you had a tour to sell this summer on the big days, it was sold. I mean, you had, people calling, and as that industry continues to grow, it's going to help with the congestion, because you'll have people out on the water watching whales, sea otters, anything that we can do to create opportunities for locals to generate tours. Year-round, it might not be a year-round job, but you can make a year-round wage in 6 months. And that's what this industry will do. And with the numbers that we have now, we have 8 employees that pretty much work 7 months out of the year, but they're making a year-round wage. So people don't view it as a year-round industry, but it does provide year-round wages. That's basically the summary of the cruise terminal. Everything went well. Shuttle is our biggest concern, and but I think it's in everybody's best interest to make it work, and it will help with the congestion and keep the money and passengers flowing to downtown. Thanks.
I'm not quite ready to let you go, Chris.
Okay.
I'm sorry. And like you said, the shuttle is the biggest problem. And so I'm just the thing that I'm hearing the most is the buses and how can we partner? How can we work together to transition to electric buses? And so we don't need to answer that question right here. And I'm not even sure electric buses are the answer, but maybe there's something out there we can do to ease the make it more palatable. So I'd be looking for those opportunities. And I'm sure you're
Yeah,
aware.
electric bus technology is coming along. I still don't know if it's there. A 45-foot motor coach is about $1 million currently. I think one of the solutions is if we can find an alternate location that will improve that round trip time from the dock to downtown, we have to have less buses on the road. Because currently, if you have a 45-minute round trip, we still need to move those 4,000 people as quick as we can. So the only way to do that is to add buses.
Let's continue this conversation.
All right. Any other questions?
Have you heard enough about buses yet? So Ward. It's offsite and they have to get people downtown. Are there any lessons to be learned from Ward Cove busing? I know it's not really up and operational yet, but I'm sure you talk with the Binkleys as well.
Yep, and he has many of the same issues that I have. Shuttle was, a challenge for them. They had difficulty finding location in downtown Ketchikan to drop off. They're a little bit different than us in that their schedules, they have a lot of ships that leave like at 1 o'clock. So they'd end up with people waiting till the last minute downtown. And then you have 4,000 people that want to get back to the ship in a half an hour. But we're in a little bit better position. We have a shorter distance. And I don't know if you've been to Ketchikan and driven down Tongass Avenue.
I think it's even more narrow and longer distance.
It is.
I think more challenging there, definitely. So that's
And
why I
think,
bring that up.
Their long-term goal there, they've got a couple 100-acre site is to end up with kind of a private destination.
Mhm.
That would be my guess. And that's not our intent. I mean, really, we want to be the gateway to Sitka, get the passengers off. We do have some limited shopping and
Thank you. And I do appreciate your dispersionary efforts in town. I was in Ketchikan on a 15,000 scheduled passenger day, and I went downtown and it didn't feel busy. But they have people into. So I think going forward, dispersionary, using dispersion to our advantage is going to be very much key. So thank you for working on that. I think you fully understand that, and appreciate.
That's going to be extremely crucial.
Noticing it is at the top of the hour, we're at a natural pause point. Would we like to take a break before we move on to Walk, Bike, Win? All right, 5 minutes. We'll be back. Thank you. Well, Doug now gets to talk to us about walking, biking, and winning. 3 things that I did not do much of this summer. So I don't know anything about what he's about to present. So Doug, please inform me.
This summer for the first time. Amy's going to talk about some of the background and where it came from, and then I will share about our report card, which you all have. Amy.
Yeah, so one of the elements of the plan that we talked about, particularly under transportation, was multimodal transportation. What role can walking and biking do to offset traffic congestion as well as parking constraints? And while walking and biking is not necessarily a fit for everybody, there are accessibility needs, people who have children or have to haul equipment. There's certainly some considerations for for those folks where it's not as viable, but we kind of thought there might be a target group there in the middle that with the right information, support, and incentive might be willing to walk and bike to downtown more often. And that would, again, help with those parking and traffic constraints, as well as encouraging good, healthy habits. So part of the budget going into the execution of the plan included money for an incentive program as well as for bike infrastructure. So on the incentive piece, the city partnered with Sitka Trailworks and Search Health Promotions to create this Walk Bike Win program. And in essence, it was a participatory program where people could track their commutes into the downtown area. There were extra points for commuting during days where we had Lincoln Street closures. There were extra points if you were a new commuter, if it wasn't already part of your regular routine, and extra points if you did it during sort of the peak business hours as well. And throughout the season, people tracked their commutes. And when you reached certain levels and milestones of points, you won prizes. And it was a really fun partnership between these 3 partner organizations. And Doug will kind of talk about the success of the program, but I just wanted to say one of the absolute best was a really enjoyable part to kind of see people be excited to engage in a city program and come into City Hall every week.
Thanks, Amy. And the partnership made some goals at the start of the season. We went from the first big cruise ship, which was on May the 7th, to the last big one, which was on 29th of September. And so for 5 months, people had a tracking sheet like this. And as Amy mentioned, you got extra points. And I'll just refer you to a couple of things on our report card. Our goal was to get 250 people to participate, and you could see we got 312. And then part of that was we wanted some new commuters. When Lincoln Street's closed, it takes 50 parking spots. And so we figured that we need to get some people who are new to this to help with that traffic pressure and congestion. Our goal was to get 15 new people, and we got 64. And then the other number, this 4th one down, it says people on average who commute on Lincoln Street. Our goal was that throughout the 5 months, there'd be at least 5 days when Lincoln Street was closed where we'd have over 50 people who logged. And we think that that would help with traffic pressure and parking on those really heavy used days. And we had over 50 people, more like 25 times. So it exceeded all of our expectations. But for me, the numbers only tell part of it. It's really doing surveys and talking to people. What was the impact? And so you can see at the bottom of yours, you'll see a few little testimonials, like the one at the very bottom says, this program's got me into a daily walking habit that's much more sporadic before this summer. I wanted to read a couple others. This is from a participant that said, walking and biking everywhere has helped me to incorporate health and wellness into every day, and it's helped to make it a priority. The incentives were motivating. And so a big thanks to all of the money that was spent locally. And then a couple of the businesses actually added some of their own incentives. So thanks to Yellow Jersey and Working Rugged. The gear that Amy talked about, or public art. I've seen many tourists take pictures of them. So the impact of this program will live on. A couple more. This is another quote. I think I had more positive feelings about my daily commute, knowing I was helping to be part of the solution to downtown congestion and air quality. And one last one. I'm sure my health improved with the extra exercise. I know my mental health improved as I did not have to fight traffic, possibly a reference to Salmo Creek. So in essence, this was a program that exceeded our expectations. It was a big success. And I just wanted to thank the city and the assembly for putting that $20,000 into it. Search was able to put 4,000, and then really the backbone organization was Sitka Trailworks. They put a lot of staff time, and we had this really strong partnership where we're able to provide something that made people's summer a little bit better. So thanks for having faith and giving it a try. I think we could say confidently that our town's a little bit healthier because of it. Our downtown's a little bit more spacious because of it. And I think importantly, our town's living up to that designation. We're the only community in Alaska to be nationally recognized as both a walk and bike friendly community. And the reason we go for awards like that isn't to win them, it's to earn them and then to live up to them. And this program helped us to do just that. This is a tremendous, tremendous program to help with not just health and quality of life, but affordability. It is expensive to buy, insure, maintain, and fuel a car. And there was a lot of people we know who had cars who saved money on gas because they were walking or biking downtown. So yes, we had a lot of people downtown, but we still need locals to come downtown year around. That's our spiel. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you as well. So when I first heard of this program, it was a question to me of how many new people were we actually going to get as opposed to those who already bike, and then we're just looking for incentive to do as such. And so looking at your infographic here, it looks like about 250 of the 312 people were regular bikers already. And then we got 64 new bikers or walkers out of this program.
Yeah, we define it as in the last 30 days, have you done an active commute to an everyday destination, so walking or biking? So of that 250, some of them may not even have cars and they would have done it anyways. Some would have cars and just in the last month, they'd done at least some trips. So there's sort of a wide variation. Any other questions?
Yeah, I did want to highlight one other point, and Doug did kind of touch on this, but I think it's worth explaining a little bit more. Of the 20,000 that was allocated between the incentive program and the bike infrastructure, all of that was spent locally. All of the incentives were gift cards to local businesses. And the support that we used through Trailworks was here to pay local staff. And all of the bike racks were procured through Precision Boat Works as well. So all of the, we had a few of the N racks that accommodate six bicycles each. We had 3 of those, and then the herring racks were also made by Precision. So all of that you allocated went right back into the community.
Thank you for doing that. I do have to admit, I think the fish herring thing, they're really cool. It's something different, something original. And although I didn't do it consistently, I did do some walking to and from work.
All right.
And Amy, can you remind me, was this program using, I still call it CPED. So could this program use those funds? Have we?
I believe I will have to follow up and see what proportion we had estimated to reimburse. I don't know if it was the entirety or if it was a portion that we had planned to reimburse through CPV.
Yeah, and I'm curious because it doesn't really help the visitors. You know, it has to have like a dual.
And I think that's why we didn't. And yeah, I don't want to speculate.
Right, and I don't want us to get in trouble with that, using those funds, obviously, but anytime that we can leverage our visitors to make things better for our locals, count me in. So thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. I play musical chairs here. So the next piece that we wanted to give you a brief update on was the traffic study. So part of, a huge part of the plan was what future planning needs are, but also to support our conversations with DOT. Given that a lot of the major roadways involved in the tourism sector for Sitka and our downtown area, primarily being Sawmill Creek, Halibut Point Road, and Harbor Drive, and the section of Lake Street up to the roundabout is all controlled by DOT. Working through, the management of those roads with another agency and the necessary data to, approach DOT to try and push for changes, has to be documented, has to be thorough, and we have to be able to make our case and make our justification. And so we wanted to get that data and, measure it real time during the summer and then document it and be able to share it. So just a few of the key points. We're still working on finalizing the final report for that. But there's, I think, some interesting points. I think there are consultants at that intersection, and we believe that the recommendation is there. It's going to be needing a dedicated left turn lane coming from Lake Street onto Lincoln, as that appears to be the biggest delay in that intersection. Also, the obvious ones, and we'll hear about this when we talk about the community survey results, as well as obviously Harbor Drive, the amount of pedestrian use and jaywalking coming out of this facility across Harbor Drive is really significant. But there's also pedestrian issues that we want to look at, particularly on Summer Creek in front of coming out of Totem Park and towards across the street for the Raptor Center, as well as for the crossing at the Fortress as well. We also have some work going on to look at some of the other intersections that we heard resident concerns about because of increased bus traffic, and that was primarily Cascade Creek Road as it intersects with Halibut Point Road, as well as the Peterson and Brady Street. As they're the traffic consultants are going back and looking through historic crash data as well to help us better understand what the risks at those points are, and also helping us formulate what some recommendations might be in working with DOT to improve pedestrian safety in those areas. In studying the Lincoln Street closure, it was really helpful to have both the qualitative and quantitative aspects of that study work. On a quantitative perspective, our consultants did not find that there was excess traffic being diverted onto some of our smaller streets, because there was some concern about Seward Street and Catlin Avenue potentially getting more traffic as a result of the Lincoln Street closure. May have some anecdotal evidence that people are using streets on any of those detour streets as a result of the closure itself. So again, most people are still staying on the main thoroughfares there, and we're not seeing those kind of negative spillover effects onto other streets. We also had the opportunity to monitor our parking lot availability in some of the main parking lots in the downtown area. It was throughout those lots, and then when Lincoln Street was open, there was about 20 to 25% availability. So certainly tighter on days where Lincoln Street was closed and that parking is not available. We estimate that there's about 50 to 55 spaces on Lincoln Street when open. So certainly a little bit of tightening in our lots, but still a consistent level of availability in our lots, even on days when Lincoln Street was closed. On the quantitative aspects, I think it was helpful to kind of hear the consultant's perspective in talking with both city departments, but also kind of the broader public and some of the businesses downtown, and kind of mixed results as well. I think we hear those that liked the closure quite a bit, those who didn't. I think the conclusion from the consultants is that overall the closure has been fairly well received. But something that really struck them that I was happy to hear is that they were struck by how well informed kind of practice about the closures. People knew where to look for information, were used to seeing it. And they felt that there was a really good level of information, and people felt that, oh yeah, this is kind of just daily life now. We know where to look for the information. We know when it's we'll be working to finalize that traffic study in the coming weeks and share the final results with both bodies. And there will be some preliminary recommendations on things that we should be looking to do for projects. There'll be some kind of general recommendations, but there may also be an opportunity to fund a further stage of this traffic study to get in larger capital projects that might be needed. So lots more information to come on the traffic study, but I think overall, we really met our objective in getting this data during the summertime while it was live, getting both qualitative and quantitative aspects and addressing multimodal transportation.
Slide, and if you did, what were their, how perceptive were they to it?
Yeah, we had we got the engineering team, the engineering section here in August as well. They studied the light and took measurements for the potential change of lanes to add a left turn lane. So they were interested, but not a firm commitment as of yet. We will continue to push on that. And, you know, we had kind of started discussions on this over a year ago in August. And so I think the results of the traffic study coming out, so I'll say it's really strong in terms of what problem this is. I think the results of our community survey that really highlight what an issue this is, I think will really add to the case that we will make for these improvements to be made before next season.
Thank you. That was my other question about timing. Thank you.
Anything else on traffic study? All right, I will let John talk a little bit about the cost allocation study.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I was hoping that I would have the study completely finalized and able to include in the report here, but we were doing some final cleanup edits to it. Really, we're down to just the grammatical issues and formatting and making it look nice, but we still wanted to put a good product out there. So we did our final review on it just a couple days ago, but to go back and explain where this comes from is, you know, there's this pot of tourism dollars, this head tax money that we used to call CPAT, now we call the CPV funds, and that's only because some other communities made fun of me for calling it CPAT. So the CPV funds, and the East Alaskan community went through and their use of those funds, and really what this comes down to is this funding is governed by law, and what's not appropriate. It's the conversation should be more centered around what follows the law and what doesn't follow the law. So when you hear me talk about us presenting this to CLIA's lawyers, it's not like we were looking for CLIA's lawyers to say, yeah, that's okay, go ahead and do that. What we were looking for is we kind of want some concurrence and a good discussion with them to say, does this look like we're on the same track on interpreting appropriate use of this funding? So that's kind of the stage we're at right now. Is study's been wrapped up. A draft was delivered to CLIA, and Melissa Haley and I have been reviewing what we have in our offices and making sure we have a really good product out there before we put it out on the streets. But I think everybody knows that there's a lot of direct and indirect costs that come from cruising, and those costs tend to fall onto the citizens. You know, the buses that are going back and forth from the cruise terminal to here, you know, there's wear and tear on the roads. There's, I can't let a tourism meeting go by without talking about toilet paper at Harrigan Hall. So Tony didn't even pick up on it. But, you know, those are some of your indirect costs, or even pressure washing the road out front after the buses use the the roundabout here at Harrigan Hall at the end of the year. There's a lot of cleanup work that we need to do. There's a lot. To manage the passenger flow. So the law says that the CPV funds have to directly serve the ship. You know, and if you look at it and you know, it should be dock improvements or, you know, dock electrification is a big one right now. But really, I think you'll see from this study that there's a lot of indirect costs that we're not capturing. And frankly, the citizen had subsidized the tourists for quite some time. Some interesting things I've learned out of the study is that, you know, we thought we were going to see really big numbers on what was it, Amy? Wastewater, water, and solid waste. We thought we were going to see the meter move a big deal on, you know, more people in town, water's on more often, they're flushing more toilets, and there's more garbage. Well, the garbage is essentially covered in user rates. You know, if you call for more tourists that's coming in, and then water and wastewater, we really couldn't find a good, reliable way to measure it because it's not just the wastewater coming from usage. Sometimes we have high water years, sometimes we have low water years. In fact, when we looked at wastewater this year, I think the usage was less than it was the year that we had no tourists here. So we really didn't have anything reliable to measure against. And then when we did some assumptions, it moved the meter so little that it wasn't even worth including into the study. But we did learn a lot of good information from this. And as I said, we're having discussions with CLIA and some of the partner cruise line agencies. And we just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page with the interpretation on appropriate use of these funds, and make sure that that we're all following the law, that the citizens aren't subsidizing the tourists, and that really we're all just getting along. You know, the litigation was just as unpleasant for the cruise lines as it was for the and I think we're doing a lot of good homework to make sure it doesn't happen again. So open to any questions if you have any.
I just wanted to make sure I understood that right. So I had been hoping that we would be able to, wow, it's a phrase I'm hesitant to use, but flatten the curve, reduce the climb in our rates for things like wastewater. And so we had in terms of weather and a lot of ships, and it came out to the same amount of water through. So there's really no justifiable way on that particular item.
Well, yes and no. I can't give you a concrete number, but I don't think I could confidently say we're going to take this chunk of money from CPV and subsidize the electric fund. I don't have a strong enough formula to say that's appropriate, but I think capturing a lot of these indirect costs in other ways are going to, I'll use the same term, it's going to flatten the curve. In my opinion, I think it's going to flatten the curve on
It's been done in Juneau, I think, right? They've done cost allocation work there, and so
Right.
can we just model on what Juneau did, or our systems are so different it doesn't?
ours is, I wouldn't say it's, we're not a one-to-one comparison because Juneau owns their own, some of their own docks. We don't. And they don't own their own utilities. We do. So it's difficult to say, but I will say that I did talk to Juneau quite a bit before this tourist season started, to understand how they got to their appropriate uses. And they were the ones that pointed me towards a cost allocation study. And we talked to Skagway. I think they had done one as well.
So there's more to come on this. You'll have something at some point, and that may impact our rate increases
Absolutely.
as soon as this year.
John, if I can follow up on that just a minute, a couple of things. One of the things we keep hearing all the time when we're talking about electrical is only part of the cost, that the access is the major cost. Like, having the electrical cables, the get to the house or business, having this water and sewer. So it seems being used or how much sewer is going out is not as much as is not the only part of the picture, that we need to look at what is it costing to have that access and keeping that access maintained for the increased tourism. And so and then I guess you say it's not quite done yet, but do you have any kind of an idea of, like, okay, after this year, how much we're going to be able to allocate back to offset costs?
I don't have a hard number for you right now. And I'd hesitate saying that number, but the study does have a bit of a formula that says per passenger, it should be about this much per passenger. And to address your question about, access to provide the service, wander into, the mayor was at that same meeting when we were at C-Trade last year, when we sat down with CLIA's lawyers, and they really simplified it. And Juneau has done the same thing. They said, build a map, kind of set out zones A, B, and C. Zone A is there's no doubt that everything in here is appropriate. B, stay away from that. Our map right now kind of has those zones, but we also had the consultant develop routes. There's some solid lines and some dashed lines. So it's solid lines if vehicles access those routes going to and from the ship. There's dashed lines if it's pedestrians that are going from here to some of the other locations in town. So at least we have something that says these are the access routes they were using. And I think there's some healthy discussion we can have with them. And I don't think there'd be much argument as long as it's falling within those boundaries.
I guess one follow-up. So what I'm hearing is, and we've talked to all the assembly members individually about this allocation study, but this was, and just for the public, I know there was a lot of people listening, to make sure that we're maximizing all the revenue from this that we can possibly. So yeah, one, we're not subsidizing this industry, and so that we're actually going to be benefiting. We are benefiting through the sales tax receipt, but also it's been a lot of our hopes that it is an inconvenience in the summer downtown and everything. And what I'm hearing is that there is a possibility that we could somehow realize cost savings for citizens on the rates.
I think that's a good summary.
Okay.
Any other? Move on to the survey results. So we had, again, the survey was open September 15th through October 15th. It was available online, and it was also available in paper copy at the City Hall and at the library. In total, we had 601 respondents, so a really healthy response rate. I was really happy. Vast majority identified as resident, with 95% and 4% identifying as seasonal residents. A little bit on our demographics here, a little bit on the older age with 40 plus being the vast majority of respondents, and a little less so on our 20 to 40 age range, but not, I would say, significantly far off from, representation within the community in terms of our age demographics. A fifth of survey respondents stated that they were retired. About just shy of another fifth are in government, whether that be federal, state, local, or tribal. 10% in healthcare, and in total, about 11% combined between downtown merchants and and that sort of thing. We did ask specifically for downtown merchants and businesses to identify if possible, as opposed to just kind of pretty good distribution there in terms of industry representation, and most of the respondents are those who drive vehicles. This was really a kind of interesting aspect of the survey, as we asked where people live and then where they're commuting to work. And when we look at the results of where people live, when you combine Japonski Island, our sort of downtown core area, and then Catlian Avenue and the Sitka Indian Village there, we're looking at about 50% of survey respondents there. So, it's really important to kind of keep that in mind when we talk about traffic impacts and congestion in the downtown area, is that, yet we think a lot of downtown for shopping and retail and restaurants, but a lot of people are coming into the sort of larger downtown area to just, go about their daily business and get to work. And so impacts in terms of traffic and congestion really impact daily life quite a bit. And so to me, this was very illuminating in terms of getting the distributions and kind of seeing the areas of town where people are traveling out of. Because you can see the North Edgecombe Drive and Cascade Creek area has 13% residential, as well as the Midtown area decreasing from 19% lived to 8% worked. And then our, of course, the Sawmill Creek area as well for movement out of Jamestown Bay out to Whale Park into the downtown area too. So probably some things that I think we all anecdotally know, but helpful to put some numbers around where, when we think about, again, daily impact, we're talking about places where people, yes, like to do fun things and shop and get errands done, but also work. So those traffic impacts end up being really, in terms of travel frequency into our Lake Lincoln area, through that intersection there, through the roundabout into downtown in general. Kind of interesting results in terms of the downtown availability for parking, for parking availability specifically, with, really a strong majority of respondents stating that it was moderately or very difficult to find parking. Doesn't necessarily match with the findings that we're seeing in the traffic study. Some interpretation there is likely that while general parking downtown was available, it may not be in the place, as close in proximity to where that resident wanted to travel to, or as close to or would prefer to. And so that kind of speaks a little, I think, probably a little bit more to the difficulty as opposed to just overall availability. Lot of impact on residents for the Lake Lincoln intersection. That was where we saw the most kind of somewhat or severe impact. Then again, of course, the roundabout. There's just a really persistent concern about pedestrian safety on Harbor Drive. In terms of downtown visitation, there were those who days in the past too. We always kind of, my personal anecdote is those days where Lincoln Street, back in the day before we did closures and you turned down Lincoln Street, you would immediately go, oh gosh, why did I do that? Because you're you're stuck going through, a really congested area. So not surprising to see this number, of course, because it coincides with those larger days. But 10% saying that maybe they went a little bit more often. So pretty marginal on that. I was really happy to see the results on communications. Most people feeling, only 25% of respondents saying that they were dissatisfied with the level of communication. To some extent, I think is generally pretty good. We have a really difficult time in sometimes reaching the broader community through communications. So, seeing that, kind of lower responses on dissatisfaction was, I think, a good thing. And newspaper ended up being a really valuable way to advertise those closures. A lot of people were using on the radio, since we were keeping the community calendar updated with those upcoming closures. And then just the street signage as well. The sandwich board sign that Visit Sitka had outside theirs, but also just, you get to the intersection, you see the right lane is closed, the street's closed. And so in total, we're looking at about 55% of respondents who next season support the closure of Lincoln Street. 35% who support it as it was run this season. So from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on days where we have 5,000 or more passengers in town based on capacity. With 21% saying that they would support it with some modifications. So maybe higher numbers, maybe we close at a little bit higher number, or the hours might be modified a little bit. But overall, between those two categories, we're looking at 55%. 23% would prefer to have no modifications, no closures of Lincoln Street, with 13% answering that they would prefer a one-way option instead. Taking place in terms of the level at which we should close it, that threshold was definitely the strongest answer there, was that 5,000 mark. Some other information about other city sites or amenities. Happy to see that there was, generally higher levels of satisfaction with the level of sort of trash management across our facilities. Very, very few areas where we had high rates of dissatisfaction, and that was again measured across just sort of generally in the downtown area, Harrigan, the library, Lake Lincoln restrooms, and the Crescent Harbor parking lot. That was the one where we saw the highest levels of dissatisfaction. But overall, people felt either neutral or generally pretty positive about how we were managing that. And only seeing, about a fifth of survey respondents stating that there was an impact for use of the Crescent Harbor boat launch. And so a significant percentage of the survey respondents saying that they weren't impacted at all or had very low impact. But that's not to say, that's still a community trade-off that was made as a part of the plan. In terms of the temporary restroom placement, there was kind of mixed results. I don't think that this gives a particularly strong sense for any of the locations. There's, it's slightly marginal that more people would, prefer to keep those same locations to use Max Sudoff Street again and then use the Lincoln Street locations again, but it's a pretty narrow margin on that. So, there's
Can I ask about those, Amy?
Yeah, absolutely.
The hard plumbing idea, is that still on the table?
We would definitely like to. It would be a lot easier in terms operationally if those were plumbed. It would save on the pump out time and stuff. Can be somewhat expensive to prepare the site. And particularly in the time we had, and by the time we got the restrooms, we thought we were going to get them sooner than we did, and there was quite a bit of delay in the shipping on those units. And so, getting them in place and realizing that, we had such limited time at that point, and then to contemplate tearing up asphalt you know, when we're getting those units in place in June
Right.
was, yeah.
And
kinda
if,
not feasible.
if they are hard plumb, do they remain temporary? Can they still be moved away in the winter?
Yes, we can install hard connections that can then be capped, and we can move the units on the off season.
Okay, thanks.
There were some responses in the long form about the units being more available in off hours. So later into the evenings or on the weekends when the street wasn't closed and cruise ships weren't here. But the challenging part is that those, the units themselves, yes, were purchased with the CPV funds, but moreover, the temporary staff that we had in place were funded through the CPV fund. We appreciate the support that we had in terms of the funding for those positions, but actually recruiting and filling those positions was really difficult. And so I think we were only able to fill 1 to 1.5, and it kind of varied throughout the season, but like 1 to 1.5 of the 2 positions that we had wanted for grounds, which was kind of handling the custodial aspect of these units as well. And with such limited time for them, having more hours would have meant paying overtime, and in some cases we already were, just to keep things running as normally as possible. So kind of trying to take into consideration what the capacity of our crews are, and staffing to offer more hours, and then how and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but that I think kind of fed some of the perception that locals didn't feel like those units were for them, or that they were being prioritized, and that the visitors were more important in that equation. But a lot of it came down to what was the funding source and what's the staff availability. And so we asked this question in the survey of, would you support the use of additional city funding to keep the temporary bathrooms open? And stronger no vote on that one, with nearly half of respondents saying no, they didn't want additional funding to keep those bathrooms open for longer hours. So that's a bit of a interesting trade-off to make there, and I think probably worth some consideration. Programs for next season. There was kind of marginal support again for the idea of having a looping shuttle system in the downtown area. So something people could kind of hop on and hop off to get from perhaps the farther ends of Lincoln Street and back and forth. Food cart operations on Lincoln Street, a lot of people wanted to see that continued. And even for those who didn't, were interested in still using city-owned property for food cart operations, but maybe perhaps not right on Lincoln Street. But overall, and some of the comments that we saw in the survey responses too were that people liked the food carts and thought it was kind of a fun, festive way to utilize the street. And this was a bit of a trick question, but we were gauging both people's interest in the Walk Bike Win program, but also their knowledge of it. So we had a little bit more on the unsure category here. So it's just kind of interesting to see how wide the reach and knowledge of that program was. But for those who were aware of the program, a lot of support for continuing that next. Or sorry, quantitative data here is the overall visitor industry impact. So as a part of the pre-season survey that we did for the plan, we were measuring how the community felt the overall visitor industry, how they impact the community, and then breaking that between cruise visitation and seasonal independent travel. So it was interesting to see the pre and post-season pretty significant decline in the overall, with, we had about 75% of respondents in the preseason survey who felt that there was a highly positive or moderately positive impact from the visitors industry overall, dropping to, about just under 55% in the postseason. Even, here in the cruise visitation piece specifically, feeling that there was a negative impact, whether that be moderate to highly negative, coming into the postseason rating, and even our seasonal independent travel took a bit of a hit, dropping about 20 percentage points, just on the number of people who felt that was a highly positive impact. Couple of different confounding factors here. The first is that the preseason survey had I want to say about 145 respondents versus 600. So perhaps this is a more representative pool. Season, it's so immediate. And this was a challenging season with, we've talked about the kind of confounding factors on traffic particularly, that made things difficult, and people going from 2 seasons of very low numbers to 1 big season. That's a significant jump. And so people's feeling about pre and post is, almost certainly impacted by the kind of jarring shift, and the sort of really important to track, and definitely an important way for us to gauge how the community is feeling about the industry. But just the in and of itself, those those numbers jumping drastically between pre and post season. And then last here on the trying to give some overall shape to what the open comment section looked like. So again, we had a total of just over 600 respondents total in the survey, and a little over 400 answered those long form questions. And the 2 questions that we asked in long form are, are there any new programs or that you would like the city to think about, or things that we could have done differently on the program, and then just your overall feedback about how the season went. The vast majority of those comments were traffic related. So over 200 traffic concerns, 120 were regarding pedestrian safety and bike safety as well. That also, there in that same category, there was some concern about e-bikes and scooters as well. So, that's something we'll talk about under the staff feedback as well. And then just over 100 comments almost exclusively about the Lake Lincoln intersection. So it was really evident that people were feeling the strain of that intersection. And then there was some that were just kind of general about traffic. But if I would say if there's any two topic areas that came up the most in those comments, it was the Lake Lincoln intersection and jaywalking on Harbor Drive. Round about 1 out of 6 respondents total in the survey voiced one or more of these sentiments. So there was concern or dissatisfaction with the amount of visitation that we experienced, feelings that quality of life had been negatively impacted, or that locals were not being prioritized from, in the eyes of the city. And the last one was complaints related to the bus operations. So either the volume of buses coming and going, and or environmental impacts as a result. Some of these smaller numbers here, not a whole human, so just decided to just put the numbers in there. But again, the biggest one outside of this, we had 51 comments that spoke to environmental concerns, whether that be air or water pollution, emissions, or noise factors. 43 who voiced the desire to have different locations for the portable restrooms or permanent facilities instead of the portable restrooms. 41 that would like to see expanded use of the closure area, perhaps extended hours so that locals can go and enjoy it a little bit more in the evening time, more vendors or food carts, a lot of positive comments about busking, or perhaps there were some of this also included some comments about wanting more benches or decor and that kind of thing in the downtown area. So just kind of using the closure area a little bit more. 25 comments related to visiting downtown less often or shopping downtown less often. About 23 that were positive feedback about how our operations went, or just sort of handling of the tourism situation. 19 that stated that there was, kind of the need for more revenue or money to come from the industry to kind of spread community benefit a little bit more widely. Similar number looking for extended hours or availability of those portable restroom units. 14 that had some suggestions about modifications for the Lincoln Street closure, and then 10 each of some concerns about wanting bikes to be allowed in the closure area of Lincoln Street, and questions on the community survey?
Do you have any, how many of these do you think are unique? In other words, how many people do you think put in multiple? Or at least are some of the, like, and I was thinking more along the lines of the phone lines or during the season feedback.
Oh, that I don't have, a good sense of, because we didn't track on our end the name or associated with those. Visit Sitka specifically, yeah. What I thought was, so something I was doing as the survey results were coming, I was checking the incoming results almost every day, maybe every other day. So I was, watching as the results came in, and I was kind of watching to see as more results came in, did that drastically swing? And I was looking at some of the key questions. I was looking at the resident, non-resident distribution, level of impact on some of the traffic questions, definitely gauging the preference for Lincoln Street, because I knew that was going to be a really important one coming out of the survey response. And once we hit about the 75 mark for total respondents, I thought it was really interesting. The distributions on those key questions didn't significantly change. So I don't think that there was a lot of duplicate or a effort for people to kind of go in and sway the vote one way or the other, because it was really interesting to see those distributions stay about constant.
Yeah, I was thinking more along the lines of the calls and complaints, because I know that we saw some of those, and I know that some of those were duplicate.
Yeah.
Thank you for your work on this. This is tremendous.
Bit of the staff feedback and perspective. And this is sort of, we'll kind of categorize this in terms of operations. So the things that we were directly involved in, or, our departments generally would be involved in. And then just sort of observations about, whether that be sort of community sentiment or community need. On the operations side, staffing and capacity was definitely strained this year. This was a heavy lift for a couple of our key departments, and just like every other industry, the city has also struggled in recruiting. Some of these operations into day-to-day work was really challenging, and I think going forward we have to think really critically about how we what we do and don't take on, what we look for outside help to manage, because this, while I think overall, most of the things that we did worked well, it was not without sacrifice, whether that be time, whether that be other projects, organization. That's definitely a concern that I heard very strongly from the rest of staff. On traffic and safety, we were seeing the same issues as well. We definitely have concerns about pedestrian safety. The Lincoln Street closure definitely, and that was kind of the primary aspect at the planning commission level when we were working on the plan, that we even brought the proposal forward for the closure. It was entirely based around safety, and if it happened to improve customer experience, I guess that's good, but that wasn't really the planning aspect on it, was pedestrian safety. And so that definitely, I think, went a long ways in improving pedestrian safety, but we have those same concerns, particularly on Harper Drive as well, and we'll continue concerns about that and see what we can do to be proactive about it in the future. Bike safety and sort of talking as well with e-bikes and scooters as well. We definitely have concerns about vehicles and pedestrians interacting, but we also have concerns about bikes and pedestrians interacting. You have two different modes of transportation working at highly different speeds, and different maneuverability, different visibility. And the bikes, particularly in the closure area, there's it was a small contingent, but there was, I think, a considerable one in terms of passion for the topic about bikes in the closure area. But there's about safety aspects of intermixing bikes and people. And with the growth of e-bikes and scooters as a rental industry and moving at high speed as well. And we're also seeing some of those who are new to the community, who don't know the rules, who are on vacation and just kind of enjoying their time using sidewalks and being in the closure area. To make a little bit more clear what our wishes and expectations are for that, I think is going to be important. And then, of course, efficiency too. We share the same concerns about everyone moving through town quickly and efficiently as possible. And again, the work being done in the traffic study, I think, will really help us advance those conversations with DOT for improvements. We continue, I think, to struggle on permitting. It's a big topic. And right now our permitting processes are really dispersed across city departments. And some are in code, some are done by policy, some permits go to commissions, some are done internally. And so I think citywide there's still a need for us to try and make more efficient and streamline our permitting process, but it's a really big undertaking. Particularly, in terms of as it relates to tourism. Of course, we're going to be looking at Harrigan and overall Bending as well as areas that definitely need a little bit more improvement, and areas where we want to be more clear with the public as well. I'll call myself out on the food cart permitting. There were a lot of changes that we made kind of last minute, and it was tough on the vendors. It was tough on staff. It was certainly not the ideal. But again, working with really limited time to plan and, limited resources to get those things done, kind of puts everyone on a tough plane. But that's something that I think we want to work to improve.
Yeah. For the Harrigan Centennial Hall, all the permitting stuff, those conversations are going to be ongoing over this winter, right? So there's more coming up. We don't need to talk about things tonight. We recognize that there's a need, and then that will happen over the winter. Okay, thanks. And I have had people talk to me about both the Centennial Hall and food truck vendors. And so sooner rather than later is probably good while it's still fresh, I guess. Thanks.
From a sort of observational standpoint, again, we definitely observed the traffic impacts, and I think that really impacted people's overall perception of the season, of the plan, of the increase in the visitation numbers. And I think when we are able to put the Sawmill Creek project to bed, when we can get a little more collaboration on the intersection to get that flowing a little bit better, experience the summer will certainly not disappear, but will really be mitigated quite a bit. In terms of quality of life and the kind of local prioritization of locals, I think a couple of things are worth talking about in this area. The Lincoln Street closure, in and of itself, has, again, mixed results. We knew that going in. We expected that would be the case. It's seeming, at least from the survey results, that more people are in favor of it than not, but that doesn't mean that there's not still a considerable contingent that are wanting to see it not done or maybe done a little bit differently. And so I think it's important for us to kind of consider, what do we want for next year and what potential changes we might make. One of the observations that I've had, and I certainly don't want to claim credit for it because I've had a lot of comments come to me about it, is that, are we increasing the capacity of our downtown by closing the street and absorbing more of that pedestrian flow? Whereas if we did close the street, would it maybe feel a little bit more uncomfortable and decline on passenger experience and help reach that stasis point a little bit sooner? Maybe it would, but there is a trade-off in that, and that I think is a very real safety impact. And so trying to right size what feels right in the downtown area, but not artificially shaping what that capacity is, a really difficult balance. And so I think that's another consideration that we're going to have to make going into the future. Certainly the busing operations are, with that being such a prevalent response in the survey, and I know that commission members and assembly members get a lot of comments about concerns about the buses. It may be worth having your newly opportunities to offer incentives or partnerships on moving towards electric or other forms that maybe would be a little bit less disruptive. And so I think that, in terms of getting at quality of life impacts, one of the biggest things that we could but something we could try and approach would be the busing aspect. And I think the cost allocation study should help to some extent. And I think communicating the results of that cost allocation study and making a little bit more clear what the community-wide benefit of we closed Lincoln Street to increase the passenger experience and to get more sales tax revenue. But that I think these bodies know, and I don't have to say it, but I think for the public, they do need to know that was not the aim of the closure. It was a safety consideration. I think there are those things that lead to a perception that there is, more prioritization on one group versus the other. And it's important for us to listen to those things because perception matters, regardless of whether that's our intention in making these choices, that is the perception, and it matters. And I want to, as much as we can, communicate to our community that these are, the decisions that we make are, trying to be inclusive for everyone's considerations to keep people safe, and to try and create as much benefit across the board as possible. And then in terms of long-term planning, there's always the question of like, okay, we've got the short-term plan. What's the long-term plan? And I think it's important for us, as within the context of these bodies, to think really hard about providing direction on those. So, the things that we can control are city property, our infrastructure, contracts that we have, or ordinances and policies. And there's certain elements that are not so squarely in our control. And so if we think about what we want to do in the long term, we need to, I think, have very clear direction and very clear focus on what those controllable factors are. And I think part of the reason that the short-term tourism plan was able to come together quickly, and it's something I really appreciate that Chris did early on, was keeping us focused on the things that were within the city's purview to actually wanted to share a little bit on the cruise ship calendar for the upcoming year. This was the calendar that I pulled from CLIA's, Cruise Line Agencies of Alaska's website that they posted on the 13th. So numbers on this calendar are in total 527,901 total passengers for 2023. We are hearing from the industry that we should expect close to 100% capacity or more. I recently just learned that a ship can have over 100% capacity because 100% capacity means 2 people in a berth. But berths, sometimes have families and children, and so can therefore have more. So capacities can be 100 to potentially 112%. So we are hearing that we should be expecting close to, if not 100% capacity. And we do still have some unknowns with the Skagway closure of one of their berths. So we are expecting to see an even bigger season next year. Monday through Wednesdays are really reliably busy throughout the year, with Sundays and Thursdays being our really kind of intermittent days. I did a little bit again of this breakdown here. We're expecting to see about a quarter of the season at our lower, percent in the 2,000 to 5,000 range, another 22% in the 5,000 to 7,000 range, and just about 13 days where we've got 7,000 or more passengers. Questions, thoughts on cruise ship calendar? All of the changes that we want to see for next season tonight. I was hoping that there would be some time for discussion to help kind of provide the Planning Commission and the Planning Department with at least a sense on some of the things that you might want to see continued, discontinued, added, changed, or explored for next year. The plan at this point will be for the Planning Commission over the course of November to work on forming some recommendations on what 2023 would look like in terms of city operations, to bring those recommendations to the Assembly in December for your consideration and adoption in the start working on any of those plans in December and January. We might need to bring supplemental appropriations forward to you. We might need to be doing procurement work or putting out RFPs and that sort of thing. And those do have longer lead times. And so we will be looking to hopefully get direction between these two bodies before the end of the year. And now I'm done, Mr. Mayor.
Now everybody looks over at me. Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. Anything else from anybody?
Yeah, I did have one more question. Visit Sitka brought the guy in, Roger, to look at ways to improve the first impression that people get in Sitka and their navigability around town. What's happening with that? Where does that come in together with what we're talking about tonight? Does that fall 100% to you guys, or are there things that we need to look at from the planning or the city side?
So I think the full written report from the Roger Brooks visit, I think has just been delivered, is kind of working on getting wrapped up. So I think that's going to be distributed imminently. And I think that that's important input data for us to take in terms of forming recommendations. So I will certainly be looking through that report thoroughly to see what overlap there might be in those recommendations and things that should be considered for the 2023 season. But I would imagine Visit Sitka will probably also have some general feedback as well that speak to not necessarily things that have to be executed right away for 2023, but things that would be kind of ongoing changes or longer term projects as well.
And then my second, and I really hope final question is, when we talk about long-term, you guys early on changed it from, I think we were calling it a tourism master plan or something, and we changed it to short-term tourism plan intentionally. So I see this long-term thing here. Is there do we just work with what we did this year, do it again next year, and then start to think about long-term? Is there a need for some long-term planning in tourism? And my assumption is if there is, that's not what we do locally, but that's probably something that we would hire. And so I'm looking at sort of long-term. Do we need to do something long-term? And then how do we fund that? And that, I hope, is my last question.
So I hope this doesn't sound too on the nose, but I would ask this body, what is your desire for long-term planning? Because, you know, you, as the assembly, you set the policy direction and assign work to administrators, to staff, to your commissions. And so I think that from the assembly in the form of direction for us. And I'm having, I guess for me personally, I'm having a harder time wrapping my mind around what the scope of those longer term plans look like. Again, given that the city has a somewhat limited role in the industry, and we have a role, we absolutely do. And we have operations and facilities and infrastructure that are involved. But
do we emphasize independent travelers more than cruise travelers? And so is that addressed with our strategic plan and our comprehensive plan? There really isn't a need, is there, to look at something specific to the visitor industry as a long-term plan? Can we just keep making this plan work?
If you're asking for my opinion or Amy's opinion, I think she summed it up well in saying that what is controllable from the city side. You know, I've always envisioned not necessarily a short-term tourism plan or a long-term tourism plan. It's drawing the boundaries around what we have that is associated with tourism, and at a given time of the year, flip the switch and say tourism is on this year and this is how we do it. And then there's a time where you shut it off at the end of the year. So you know, we have our infrastructure, we have our roads, we have Harrigan Hall, so we can do things like set what we want for permitting. We can set closure dates and times, things that the city owns and city controls, and then make adjustments in the long term through ordinances and policies like Amy put on her slide. But I don't personally think that we need to have a drawn out, documented, you know, tourism plan book that sits on our shelves. But am I off of your thoughts here?
no, not necessarily. Though, you know, impact street closures, but it also may impact marketing. You know, how do we market Sitka, and what do we want to emphasize more or less of? And so there are, again, contracts are a part of that discussion, as well as our infrastructure, our facilities. And so looking for community input on that strategy, then there should be discussion about maybe shaping out that strategy a little bit more. But again, I think it's going to be, I think it needs to be a little bit, you know, tailored to what is within our control.
And then I just want to one more time express my gratitude to planning and planning liaison. Like, this was a huge thing that you guys put together, and the summer, you know, not perfect, but what would it have been without what you did? So thank you so much for getting us on track and putting some guardrails up that we could work within.
Thanks. I echo the thanks for all the work you guys have done. I guess my approach to these things is to kind of break them into little pieces and then provide those sort of things. So from my aspects, I think I'd like to see some thing from you about the environmental impacts that we can mitigate. So for example, the busing thing has come up a lot. I wasn't even on the assembly and I heard about the buses. So traffic flow. Obviously, you guys already have talked about that. Pedestrian safety is a big one, obviously. I spent some time in Ketchikan this summer and they have the exact same problem that we do. They have a corner there where everybody cuts across it. You can see sort of the evidence of the different ways they've tried to fix that. So, I think we have a big problem with that. Permitting, obviously. And then I'd like to hear some marketing options. So like, what would that look like if we were targeting just independent travelers? What would it look like if we're trying to encourage more cruise ships? So I think for me, those are the do better looking at different pieces of it as opposed to a plan on a shelf. Because I think some of them have overlaps to other things that we're likely to be very interested in.
I guess when I was listening to Rebecca ask her questions, I think what we, to a certain extent need to separate strategic and tactical. And most of this plan is tactical. And I guess what it really, the word that kept coming to mind is goals. I mean, I think at some point we need to sit down and say, what do we see in this industry we'd like to see in 5 or 10 years? What would our goals be? I mean, and maybe it's more independent travelers, maybe it's the same, maybe it's, fully understanding that we can't control it very well. I mean, we can't make more people come and we honestly really can't stop people from coming. But we can, I think if we've got some well thought out goals, then we could possibly go to somebody like CLIA or some other organization, and say, okay, look, this is in both of our best interest to say that, if we have having more than 10, and this, I'm just throwing this number out, having more than 10,000 people a day in Sitka just doesn't make sense. That's no matter how many side trips people can make, there's just only so much land. But I think we would have to, and probably not at this meeting, say what do our goals look like, and that's more the strategic. There's the tactical. I think again, Amy has done a great job with, and we're going to be adjusting it every fall for the foreseeable future, and that's the way it should be. As we refine it, hopefully it'll get less so as we get better at it. But I like the plan of having a few P&Z meetings where we talk about, okay, maybe we could put the restroom someplace else or something like that. But that definitely falls into the tactical end.
Kind of agree with what everyone said here. I don't think anyone wants to be overwhelmed by tourists, the tourists themselves or us. I think in my mind, the goal is to allow for this industry to grow in a way that doesn't overwhelm us. And I think, like we talked about, tactically dispersion is key, but we are learning and going to be growing every year, probably several times a year. So yeah, and then strategic versus tactical. I don't know. It's hard because there's so many variables and so many things that are going to be changing over the next few years. I don't know that we know that sweet spot. But I believe that it will self-regulate, but it won't hurt to work with CLIA as we get more information, we get to our comfort level to try to encourage a certain number if we can. But I think that it will, over time, as we fine tune this, it will become very apparent what we can and cannot handle. and what tourists cannot handle. And ultimately, in my mind, the end goal of all this is to benefit us, the city. I mean, I'm not saying the city. I would like this to benefit all citizens. It's not just about letting people come and enjoy it. I mean, that's great, but in my mind, it's about to make our lives better too. That's what this is all about. So whatever we can do to make that happen. The Planning Commission and Amy and the city has been doing on this, and liaison as well. There are a lot of challenges here, and I think we need to be on our toes and be very flexible right now.
I guess one of the things that keeps coming to my mind throughout this whole evening is making things smoother. And we're already making steps towards that, working with ADOT. I think something that was brought up this evening that maybe the Planning Commission or wherever that needs to start looking at is different bus locations. We are putting a lot of traffic here at Harrigan, and seeing if we can, I don't know, disperse that a little bit. I don't know where, but I think that's something we could help Mr. McGraw with, is finding another location, working side by side for that. And then I would want to hear more about the hard lining of the restrooms. Could we potentially save money having them hard lined and not having so many man hours in maintaining those? And, you know, obviously there's going to be some cost up front, but in the end, is that going to end up saving us more? But, you know, I think as a city, what we should do is just continue to look for making it smoother and safer for all.
Any other parting thoughts from Planning Commission? Katie, I'm not sure if you're still online, but have an opportunity if you have anything to say as well.
No, we lost Katie.
Okay.
I did want to ask a question while I have the bodies here, just because, you know, we're going to attempt to move pretty quickly on bringing back recommendations to the assembly. And so I want to make sure we're using our time wisely. I'd like to hear what, because this is kind of the biggest part of the plan, I would like to hear from members about what thoughts on Lincoln Street are, at least. And no hard decisions. I don't expect a commitment, but if there's a request to, can we go back to the drawing board and look at a one-way option instead? I'd like to hear that now, so that we don't bring back something to you going, oh, I really wish it had, you know, that you guys had maybe thought a little bit more about doing a one-way option instead, or anything like that, just so that we use our time wisely.
It would be my inclination to follow the survey results. I think that's the best information we have right now. I think that for any part of this, jumping back to the survey results and seeing what the majority in that instance asked for.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with the mayor on that one.
I strongly suspect that, considering our, I guess almost, you know, cobbled together closure system this year, that as we get better at it and there's more vendors and bus, you know, people taking advantage of it, I wouldn't be at all surprised if the survey events next year are actually more supportive of the closure, because there's a lot of things that we could have done or that could have happened. It was so new, nobody took advantage of it. That, and I will say that the one thing that Roger Brooks, I wrote it down because you said it, I've forgotten his name. He was ecstatic about that. He was saying that that's one of the things that he talks to thought that again, we're looking at it from a safety standpoint, but he said from a tourist experience, that's
I know that I'm the one that's supposed to be taking the tasking here through this, but there's one thing I'd like to throw out for consideration from the survey results. You know, we saw a lot about these closures of Lincoln Street and locals being able to enjoy some of those days and more events or longer hours. You know, we've been approached over the past few years about, I think it's called First Friday events, where you get people shopping in the local stores. And I look at the cruise calendar right now and trying one or two of those to see how many locals actually show up on those days to enjoy that same thing that the tourists are trying out. But just food for thought.
Sure wish to. That would help facilitate that. I mean, wouldn't that? Oh, hello. All right, thank you much, Amy. This was definitely a large presentation on your shoulders. I think it went extremely well. I think we got a lot of information out of this and a lot of information that can continue to flow. Issues. The Planning Commission working on that and then bringing it forward to the Assembly as the process is laid out here sounds wonderful to me. I'm glad that we made it past this first year. Looking forward to the next year with an excited anxiousness. You know, we'll see how it goes, and then we'll actually see, is Sitka a 500,000 passenger town or not? We have to experience one before we can say if it is or not. You know, I didn't think that Sitka was a 350,000 passenger town, and you get through one and like, well, was it as bad as we thought it was? I don't know. So I'm glad we're getting on the curve on this. So anything else from Assembly members or staff? Planning Commission? Great. Well, thank you everybody for your participation tonight. Thank you to those who came in the audience. I really appreciate you being here as well and getting this information out to your friends and family as well. So thank you, everybody. Have a good night.